Right now, as you're watching this, your consciousness is literally creating the reality you're about to experience. But here's what's going to shock you. 99% of people are using their consciousness backwards, which is why they keep creating the same reality they're trying to escape from. Comment, I'm using it backwards. If you've ever wondered why your life keeps repeating the same patterns despite your best efforts to change. Because what I'm about to show you will fundamentally alter how you understand the relationship between your mind and your world. 3 weeks ago, I was analyzing brain scans from our latest consciousness research study when I discovered something that made me question everything I thought I knew about how humans create their reality. The participants who were successfully transforming their lives showed completely different neural activation patterns than those who remained stuck in old patterns. But here's the shocking part. The stuck participants weren't lacking consciousness. If anything, they were more conscious than the successful ones. The difference wasn't in how much consciousness they had, it was in the direction they were pointing it. 99% of people point their consciousness backwards toward their past experiences and current limitations. But the 1% who create extraordinary lives, they've learned to point their consciousness forward toward infinite possibilities. And when you understand how to flip this switch in your brain, your entire reality transforms in ways that will seem impossible until they happen to you. I'm Marcus Steinberg, and for the past 12 years I've been using advanced neuroimaging to study how consciousness literally shapes the neural networks that create your experience of reality. What I've discovered will challenge everything you've been taught about the relationship between mind and matter. But before I reveal the science, I need to ask you something that might be uncomfortable. How much of your mental energy do you spend thinking about problems instead of possibilities? How often does your consciousness automatically drift to what's wrong in your life instead of what could be right? When you imagine your future, does your brain immediately generate reasons why your dreams won't work instead of ways they could work? Comment, I think about problems if you recognize this pattern in yourself. Because here's what neuroscience has proven about how consciousness works. Your brain doesn't distinguish between what you're consciously focusing on to avoid it and what you're focusing on to create it. When you point your consciousness toward problems, limitations, and fears, even if you're trying to solve or overcome them, your brain interprets that as instructions to create more of those experiences. This is why positive thinking alone doesn't work. This is why trying harder often makes things worse. This is why smart, capable people often feel stuck despite their best efforts. They're using their consciousness with perfect precision, but in the wrong direction. Let me tell you about Jessica, a 36-year-old marketing executive who came to me completely frustrated with her inability to create lasting change in her life. I'm successful at work, I'm intelligent, I work on myself constantly, she said. I read personal development books, I do therapy, I try to stay positive. But I keep attracting the same types of relationships, the same financial stress, the same feeling that something is missing. It's like I'm cursed to repeat the same patterns forever. Jessica's brain scan revealed exactly what was happening. When she tried to work on herself, her consciousness was constantly scanning for problems to fix, patterns to break, and limitations to overcome. Her brain was generating neural activity focused on everything she didn't want, which created electromagnetic frequencies that attracted more of those exact experiences. She was using her consciousness backwards, pointing it toward her problems instead of her possibilities. But here's what happened when we taught Jessica how to redirect her consciousness forward. Within the first week, her brain scans showed completely different activation patterns. Instead of problem-focused neural networks, she was activating possibility-focused networks. Week 2, Jessica noticed she was having different types of conversations with people, and they were responding to her differently. Month 1, she met someone at a conference who offered her a dream job opportunity. Month 3, Jessica started a relationship with someone who was emotionally available and supportive in ways she'd never experienced. Month 6, her income had doubled, and she felt more fulfilled than she had in years. But here's what Jessica told me that reveals the real transformation. I didn't become a different person. I started using my consciousness the way it's supposed to be used. Instead of focusing on what I wanted to change about my life, I focused on what I wanted to create. My brain learned to look for possibilities instead of problems. Comment, I want to focus forward if you're ready to point your consciousness toward possibilities instead of problems. Now let me show you exactly what happens in your brain when you use consciousness correctly versus incorrectly. Dr. Matthew Lieberman at UCLA has identified two distinct neural networks that become active depending on how you direct your consciousness. The problem scanning network, activated when your consciousness focuses on what's wrong, what's missing, or what needs to be fixed. The possibility recognition network, activated when your consciousness focuses on potential, opportunity, and creative solutions. Here's what's fascinating about his research. People who predominantly use the problem scanning network show increased activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region associated with error detection, anxiety, and threat recognition. Their brains become hypervigilant for danger and dysfunction, which creates stress hormones that actually block their ability to recognize opportunities and solutions. But people who learn to activate the possibility recognition network show increased activity in the prefrontal cortex and temporal lobes, regions associated with creativity, innovation, and pattern recognition. Their brains become optimized for identifying potential and generating novel solutions. This isn't just about mindset or attitude. These are measurable differences in brain structure and neural chemistry that directly influence what you're able to perceive and create in your life. Comment, I want possibility brain if you're ready to rewire your neural networks for opportunity recognition. Let me tell you about Marcus, a 41-year-old small business owner who had been struggling financially for 3 years despite working 16-hour days. I analyze every aspect of my business constantly, he said. I look for problems, inefficiencies, things that aren't working. I'm obsessed with fixing what's wrong, but somehow things keep getting worse instead of better. Marcus's brain scan showed hyperactivity in his problem scanning network and almost no activity in his possibility recognition network. His consciousness was so focused on what was wrong with his business that his brain had literally lost the ability to recognize what could go right. He was using his consciousness backwards, turning it into a problem-finding machine instead of an opportunity-creating instrument. When we taught Marcus how to redirect his consciousness toward possibilities, his brain patterns shifted dramatically. Week 1. Instead of analyzing problems, Marcus started imagining ideal outcomes and breakthrough scenarios. Week 3. He noticed a potential partnership opportunity he'd been overlooking for months. Month 2. Marcus implemented a new business model that increased his revenue by 40% while reducing his working hours. Month 4. His business was thriving, and he had more time for his family than he'd had in years. Marcus told me something that perfectly captures the power of forward-directed consciousness. I realized I was spending all my mental energy looking for what was broken instead of what was possible. When I flipped that switch, my brain started finding solutions everywhere. It's like I was living in a different universe, the same circumstances, but infinite more possibilities. Here's where it gets really interesting from a quantum physics perspective. Dr. Dean Radin's research at the Institute of Noetic Sciences has proven that consciousness doesn't just observe reality. It actively participates in creating reality through what physicists call observer effects. When you point your consciousness toward specific aspects of your experience, you literally increase the probability of those aspects manifesting more frequently. This happens through what quantum physicists call probability wave collapse. Your focused attention causes certain possibilities to become more likely, while others become less likely. But here's the crucial part that most people miss. Your brain doesn't distinguish between what you're focusing on because you want it and what you're focusing on because you don't want it. If you're constantly thinking about debt because you want to get out of debt, your consciousness is still pointed toward debt, which increases the probability of more debt-related experiences. If you're always analyzing your relationship problems because you want to fix them, your consciousness is still pointed toward relationship problems, which increases the probability of more problematic relationship experiences. This is why trying to solve problems often creates more problems. This is why fighting against what you don't want often creates more of what you don't want. You're using your consciousness with perfect precision, but backwards. Comment, I've been fighting backwards if you recognize this pattern in your own life. Let me tell you about Sarah, a 29-year-old teacher who had been struggling with anxiety and depression for over 5 years. "I've tried everything to fix my mental health," she said. "Therapy, medication, meditation, journaling. I analyze my thoughts constantly, trying to understand why I feel this way and how to feel better. But the more I work on it, the worse it seems to get." Sarah's brain scan showed exactly why her mental health efforts were backfiring. Her consciousness was constantly pointed toward her anxiety and depression, analyzing them, fighting them, trying to understand them. Even though her intention was to feel better, her neural networks were generating electromagnetic patterns focused on mental illness, which attracted more experiences that matched those frequencies. She was using her consciousness backwards, pointing it toward the mental states she wanted to escape rather than the mental states she wanted to create. When we taught Sarah how to redirect her consciousness toward mental wellness and emotional freedom, everything changed. Week 1. Instead of analyzing her anxiety, Sarah started focusing on moments when she felt naturally calm and confident. Week 2. Her brain scans showed decreased activity in anxiety-related neural networks and increased activity in well-being networks. Month 1. Sarah experienced her first full week without anxiety or depression symptoms in over 2 years. Month 3. She felt consistently happy and peaceful, and her doctor was able to reduce her medications. Month 6. Sarah was medication-free and felt better than she had since childhood. Sarah told me something that reveals the fundamental principle of forward-directed consciousness. "I stopped trying to fix what was wrong with my mind and started focusing on what was possible for my mind. I stopped being a student of my problems and became a student of my potential. My brain learned to create wellness instead of illness." Comment "I want to create wellness" if you're ready to point your consciousness toward what you want to experience instead of what you want to avoid. But here's where most personal development approaches get it completely wrong. They tell you to think positive or focus on the good, but they don't teach you how to actually rewire your brain networks to make positive focus natural and automatic. Dr. Rick Hanson's research on neuroplasticity shows that it takes specific neural training to shift from backwards consciousness to forward consciousness. Your brain has spent years or decades practicing backwards focus, scanning for problems, analyzing limitations, preparing for worst-case scenarios. Those neural pathways have become superhighways in your brain, while the possibility recognition pathways have become overgrown trails. But when you understand how to systematically train your consciousness to point forward, you can literally rewire your brain to become a possibility-generating machine instead of a problem-finding machine. Let me tell you about David, a 38-year-old engineer who felt completely stuck in his career and personal life. "I'm good at my job, but I feel like I'm just going through the motions," he said. "I think about what I want to change constantly, but I never seem to make progress. I analyze what's wrong with my situation from every angle, but somehow that just makes me feel more stuck." David's brain scan showed the classic pattern of backwards consciousness, hyperactive problem scanning networks and dormant possibility recognition networks. His consciousness was so focused on what was wrong with his life that he couldn't see what was possible for his life. When we taught David the neural training protocol for forward-directed consciousness, his brain patterns transformed completely. Week 2. David started noticing opportunities and ideas he'd been blind to for years. Month 1. He enrolled in a certification program he'd been thinking about for 3 years. Month 3. David received a job offer in a completely different field that aligned with his true interests. Month 6. He was working his dream job and felt more fulfilled than he had in decades. David told me something that captures the essence of forward-directed consciousness. I stopped asking, "What's wrong with my life?" and started asking, "What's possible for my life?" That one shift changed everything. My brain went from being a limitation detector to being a possibility detector. Comment "I want possibility detection" if you're ready to reprogram your consciousness for opportunity recognition. Now let me teach you the exact protocol that transformed Jessica, Marcus, Sarah, and David. I call it the Forward Consciousness Protocol. This isn't positive thinking. This isn't wishful thinking. This is precision neuroscience that literally rewires your brain to point your consciousness toward infinite possibilities instead of past limitations. But before we begin, you need to understand what we're doing from a scientific perspective. We're going to systematically train your neural networks to default to possibility recognition instead of problem scanning. We're going to flip the direction of your consciousness from backwards focused to forward focused. Comment, "I'm ready to flip the switch," if you want to learn how to use your consciousness correctly. Step 1. Consciousness Direction Audit. 5 minutes first, we need to identify how you're currently directing your consciousness throughout the day. For the next 5 minutes, simply observe your thoughts without trying to change them. Notice how much of your mental energy goes toward analyzing problems, reviewing past mistakes, worrying about potential difficulties, figuring out what's wrong with your current situation, versus how much goes toward imagining ideal outcomes, exploring new possibilities, anticipating positive developments, envisioning your highest potential. Most people discover they spend 80 to 90% of their consciousness pointing backwards toward problems and limitations. This awareness alone begins to shift your neural patterns because you're using your consciousness to observe your consciousness. Step 2. Neural pathway interruption. 6 minutes. Now we're going to interrupt the automatic backwards pointing of your consciousness. Every time you notice your mind drifting toward problems, limitations, or past patterns, you're going to use what I call the forward flip. Instead of trying to stop the backwards thought, you're going to ask, if this situation could work out perfectly, what would that look like? For example, if your mind goes to financial stress, ask, what would financial freedom feel like? If you start analyzing relationship problems, ask, what would my ideal relationship experience? If you worry about your health, ask, what would optimal vitality feel like in my body? This trains your brain to use problems as launching pads for possibilities instead of destinations for your consciousness. Practice this for 6 minutes, consciously redirecting your consciousness from backwards to forwards every time you catch yourself problem scanning. Step 3. Possibility field activation. 8 minutes. Now we're going to train your brain to generate possibilities instead of just recognizing them. Expand your consciousness beyond your current circumstances and connect with what I call the possibility field, the quantum realm, where all potential outcomes exist simultaneously. From this expanded awareness, allow your brain to spontaneously generate visions of your ideal life across all areas: career and life purpose possibilities, relationship and family possibilities, financial and abundance possibilities, health and vitality possibilities, creative and personal growth possibilities. Don't try to figure out how these possibilities could happen. Just allow your consciousness to explore what could be possible if there were no limitations. This activates dormant neural networks associated with creativity, innovation, and possibility recognition. Step 4. Reality bridge building. 6 minutes. Finally, we're going to train your brain to build bridges between current reality and desired possibilities. Choose one possibility that excites you most from Step 3. Instead of focusing on the gap between where you are and where you want to be, focus on the path that could connect them. Ask your consciousness, what would the first step toward this possibility look like? Who do I know who might have insights about this path? What opportunities might I notice if I was alert for them? What would someone who naturally attracts this possibility be thinking and feeling? This trains your brain to see possibilities as achievable futures instead of impossible fantasies. Practice this complete protocol daily for 21 days and watch your brain literally rewire itself to point your consciousness forward instead of backwards. Let me tell you about Jennifer, a 33-year-old graphic designer who felt trapped in a career that no longer fulfilled her. I know I want something different, but every time I try to think about changing careers, my mind immediately goes to all the reasons it won't work, she said. I think about my mortgage, my age, my lack of experience in other fields. I want to move forward, but my brain seems designed to keep me stuck. Jennifer's brain scan showed the classic backwards consciousness pattern. Her neural networks were so trained to scan for obstacles that she couldn't maintain focus on possibilities for more than a few seconds. After practicing the forward consciousness protocol for 30 days, Jennifer's brain patterns completely transformed. Month 1. Jennifer started seeing career possibilities she'd never noticed before. Month 2. She began a side project that aligned with her true interests. Month 4. Her side project generated enough income to reduce her design work to part-time. Month 8. Jennifer launched her own business and was earning more doing work she loved than she'd ever made in graphic design. Jennifer told me something that perfectly captures the power of forward-directed consciousness. I realized my brain was trained to be a problem-finding expert, when what I needed was a possibility-finding expert. When I retrained my consciousness to point forward, my whole world opened up. I started seeing opportunities everywhere because that's what my brain was finally looking for. Comment, I'm training possibility detection, if you're ready to rewire your consciousness for opportunity recognition. Here's how to adapt this protocol for different areas of your life. For career transformation, point your consciousness toward your ideal work experience instead of analyzing what's wrong with your current job. Ask, what would my perfect career feel like? Instead of, why am I stuck in this job? For relationship improvement, focus your consciousness on the love and connection you want to create instead of the problems you want to fix. Ask, what would a thriving relationship look like instead of, what's wrong with this relationship? For financial abundance, direct your consciousness toward prosperity and flow instead of analyzing money problems. Ask, what would financial freedom feel like? Instead of, why don't I have enough money? For health and vitality, point your consciousness toward optimal wellness instead of focusing on symptoms or limitations. Ask, what would perfect health feel like in my body? Instead of, what's wrong with my health? The key is consistency. Your brain needs 21 days of forward-directed practice to establish new neural pathways as your default consciousness orientation. Most people give up after a few days because backwards thinking feels so familiar and forward thinking feels unfamiliar or unrealistic. But that unfamiliarity is actually evidence that you're rewiring your brain correctly. Let me tell you what your life looks like when you master forward-directed consciousness. You stop feeling like you're fighting upstream against invisible forces. Instead, you feel like life is flowing in your direction. Problems start looking like puzzles to solve instead of evidence that something is wrong with you or your life. Opportunities appear everywhere because your brain is finally trained to recognize them. People are drawn to you because your electromagnetic field broadcasts possibility instead of limitation. Most importantly, you develop what I call reality confidence. The deep knowing that you can create whatever you focus your consciousness on because your brain is aligned with infinite possibility instead of past limitation. Comment, I want reality confidence, if you're ready to trust your power to create through conscious focus. Robert was a 45-year-old father who felt overwhelmed by responsibilities and disconnected from his dreams. I spend all my time thinking about what I have to do, what's not working, what might go wrong, he said. I love my family, but I feel like I've lost myself in the process of taking care of everyone else. I don't even remember what I wanted for my own life anymore. Robert's brain scan showed extreme hyperactivity in problem scanning networks and almost complete dormancy in possibility recognition networks. His consciousness had become so focused on managing current reality that he'd lost the ability to imagine expanded reality. After practicing the forward consciousness protocol for 60 days, Robert's entire experience of life transformed. Month 1. Robert started remembering dreams and interests he'd abandoned years ago. Month 3. He began pursuing a creative hobby that brought him immense joy. Month 6. Robert found ways to integrate his personal interests with his family responsibilities instead of seeing them as conflicts. Month 12. He had created a life that honored both his role as a father and his identity as an individual. Robert told me something that reveals the deeper transformation possible with forward-directed consciousness. I thought being responsible meant giving up on possibilities. But when I learned to point my consciousness forward instead of just managing what already existed, I discovered I could expand my reality to include both responsibility and dreams. I didn't have to choose between being a good father and being true to myself. Here's what I want you to understand about the neuroquantum community. We're not just people interested in consciousness and brain science. We're individuals who understand that consciousness is the most powerful creative force in the universe, and we're learning to use it intentionally instead of accidentally. When you comment, "I direct my consciousness forward below," you're not just engaging with content. You're declaring to the quantum field that you're ready to use your mind as a possibility-generating instrument instead of a problem-analyzing machine. You're joining thousands of people worldwide who have discovered that the direction of your consciousness determines the direction of your life. Here's your 21-day Forward Consciousness Challenge. Week 1. Practice the 4-step protocol daily, and notice how much of your mental energy typically goes backward versus forward. Track shifts in your emotional state and opportunities you begin to notice. Week 2. Focus on maintaining forward-directed consciousness throughout your daily activities. Every time you catch yourself problem scanning, immediately use the forward flip to redirect toward possibilities. Week 3. Trust the process even when forward thinking feels unfamiliar or unrealistic. Allow your brain to generate possibilities without immediately analyzing why they won't work. After 21 days, comment, "My consciousness points forward," and share your most significant breakthrough in possibility recognition. What makes the neuroquantum community extraordinary is that we understand consciousness as a precise instrument that can be trained to create specific outcomes. Most people use their consciousness accidentally, randomly, unconsciously, and then wonder why their lives feel chaotic or stuck. But you're different. You understand that the direction of your consciousness determines the direction of your reality, and you're willing to do the neural training required to point it toward infinite possibility instead of past limitation. We're not consciousness consumers. We're consciousness scientists who take responsibility for creating our experience through precise mental training. Comment, "I direct my consciousness forward" below to declare your commitment to using your mind as a possibility-creating instrument instead of a problem-analyzing machine. Subscribe to NeuroQuantum if you want to be part of a community that approaches consciousness development with scientific rigor and gets consistent results. Hit that notification bell because I'm going to be sharing advanced consciousness protocols that can only be understood by people who have committed to this level of mental mastery. The truth is, most people will watch this video, feel inspired for a moment, maybe try the protocol once or twice, and then go back to their old habit of pointing their consciousness backwards toward problems and limitations. They'll continue using their most powerful creative faculty in the wrong direction and wondering why their lives don't change. But you have a choice right now. You can continue using your consciousness the way 99% of people do, pointing it backwards toward what's wrong, what's missing, and what's not working. Or you can join the 1% who understand that consciousness is meant to be pointed forward toward infinite possibility, unlimited potential, and unprecedented breakthrough. The neuroscience is proven. The protocol is precise. The community is waiting for you. The only question is, are you ready to flip the switch and start using your consciousness in the direction it was designed to work? Your brain is listening. The quantum field is responding. Your possibilities are not just potential. They're inevitable when you point your consciousness toward them instead of away from them. Welcome to NeuroQuantum, where consciousness meets science, and where you discover your true power as a forward-directed creator of reality.